Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/OKU9707, so credits to him. This is why I never hike alone. I've hiked a lot of different trails all over the US, but some of my favorite backpacking trips have been while hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail, mostly in and around the Blue Ridge Mountains. I have lots of other friends that enjoy backpacking in the same area, and we often swap stories of our adventures. Usually they involve wildlife encounters, getting turned around and temporarily lost, getting soaked due to a freak rainstorm and forgetting another pair of dry socks. Yes, this happened to me. Stuff like that. I've also heard some stories from fellow hikers and encountered a few things myself that unsettled me and stuck with me long afterwards. These stories have a way of creeping into my thoughts and haunting me on the rare times I hike alone. I spoke with a good friend recently who told me about a backpacking experience she had a couple of years ago. She's an experienced hiker and would sometimes go out on weekend trips hiking various sections of trail through the Blue Ridge Mountains. This particular time, she described the weather as being clear and cool with not a cloud in the sky. She had been hiking toward a favorite camping spot of hers that she'd been to several times before. She'd gotten a later start than she meant to that day, and the sun was starting to set by the time she got within about a mile of the spot. She said suddenly this heavy fog rolled in out of nowhere. She remembered it being odd, because the weather had been so clear a few minutes before that. Her visibility was limited to about 25 to 30 yards ahead of her, but she pressed on knowing that her camping spot was only about a mile further down the trail. The whole time she felt this sense of dread creeping up on her. Maybe a couple of minutes after this fog rolled in, she noticed what looked like the vague outline of an elk standing in the middle of the trail. Elk aren't uncommon in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but they can be a lot more dangerous than most people realize. Inexperienced hikers, ignorant of the danger elk can pose, have been known to approach them thinking that they're just gentle giants and have frequently gotten seriously injured or even killed by them as a result. They're no joke. Knowing this, she stopped when she saw it so as to keep her distance and then started backing away slowly. As she did so, to her dismay, it started slowly approaching her. The outline of the beast was still vague, but she could tell that it was bigger than any other elk she'd ever seen. As the shape started to materialize out of the fog, she also realized, to her horror, that this thing wasn't an elk. She could make out the shape of the elk-like antlers and the vague shape of the muzzle and part of the body, but the thing that truly startled her was that the beast was slowly loping towards her on two legs. As soon as she saw this, she turned and ran. Visibility was still very limited, and she had to dodge overhanging branches, tree roots, and large rocks as she ran in a blind panic. After about 10 minutes, she told me that the fog started to clear up and the feeling of dread also faded a little bit along with it. She knew that there was no way she could make it back to her car before dark, so she got off the trail and made her way into the woods until she came to a spot which wasn't visible from the trail and where she felt safe setting up her tent. She described being hunkered down in her tent all night with her knife at the ready and hearing what sounded like an elk bellowing in the woods. If you've ever heard this, you know they can sound pretty unsettling. But she described this bellowing as being deeper and more guttural than a normal elk. At times, it even sounded like the thing was forming what sounded like they could have been words. Sometimes it was closer to her, sometimes further away, and, at one point, she thought she heard a second one. The bellowing faded off into the distance as it started getting light outside. She waited until it was bright enough outside to pack up and then booked it out there. She didn't go backpacking in the mountains for a year after that experience and now only goes with friends. As I mentioned, I've heard some strange stories, but that still ranks among the oddest I've heard, and it still bothers me to this day. There's one that bothers me more, though, because it happened to me. My son is in Boy Scouts and I'm fairly involved as a leader in his troop. So, most of the time when his troop goes backpacking, I go too. On one of these trips, we just reached our camping spot after a long day's hike. There were still a few hours of daylight left, so after everyone had gotten their tents and gear set up, most of the boys took to exploring the area around the campsite. Another hour or so went by and this thick heavy fog rolled in. Everything went dead quiet. The birds were no longer chirping, the leaves stopped rustling in the wind. Total silence. Even the words we spoke seemed muffled by the fog. Along with that silence, I began to feel weighed down by this really oppressive sense of what I can only describe as offness. It felt completely unnatural. The other leaders and I were concerned some of the boys could get lost or hurt in this fog, so we called them back to the campsite and counted them off to make sure everyone was present and accounted for. The boys are taught to always have at least one buddy with them at all times. So we counted each scout and confirmed their buddy was with them. The last boy we got to was in a sort of panic. He told us his buddy, a younger scout named Adrian, had wandered off and, after the fog rolled in, was nowhere to be seen. Everything kicked into high gear after that. We told the boys to stay at the camp and two of the adult leaders stayed with them there while the rest of us went out looking for the missing boy. We had radios with us so we could communicate if we lost sight of each other. I decided to backtrack down the trail we initially came in case Adrian had wandered back that way, and eventually came to a spot where I could make out his outline in the fog. As I approached him, I noticed his back was to me and he was standing stock-still facing the woods. I spoke his name softly and he seemed startled like he had been in some kind of trance. I asked him what he was looking at and why he'd come back down this part of the trail. He looked up at me with an expression that was a mixture of bewilderment and worry and told me that, when we'd first passed this spot while we were hiking in, he'd heard what sounded like soft laughter and voices deep in the woods. He came back to investigate thinking it must have been coming from another campsite. It made sense, but it didn't explain why he'd just been standing there staring. As I pressed him for more answers, he hesitantly told me that shortly after he'd started down this trail, the fog had rolled in. He wasn't aware that his buddy wasn't with him, he was more interested in finding out who was in the woods. When he'd arrive at the spot, he stopped to listen. As he had been standing there trying to see through the fog, he noticed a very tall, he heavily emphasized the word very, pale man peering out from behind a tree at him while also being partially obscured by the fog. As he stood staring, Adrian said he noticed more people scattered around the nearby trees also peering at him. Not saying anything, just peering at him with blank expressions. He said that one or two of them had made slow hand gestures like they wanted him to come over to them and he had suddenly felt very tired. That was when I'd found him and startled him, bringing him out of that trance-like state. I looked around and didn't see or hear anything. No birds, no insects and definitely no people. There was just us and that heavy, oppressive fog. As I started to glance back down at him, I caught a tiny movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and for one brief moment caught a glimpse of one of the people he described. He was staring at us with a blank and hollow expression as he backed further into the fog and melted away. If you've ever been to an open casket funeral, you know how the person you're looking at in that wooden box looks so much different than they did in life. They look more like a wax figure straight out of the uncanny valley. That's what the face of that man reminded me of as he was engulfed by the mist. I stood in stunned silence for a moment. As soon as I snapped out of it, we hightailed it back to camp and I radioed the other leaders to let them know I'd found the missing boy. Eventually, the fog lifted, but the disquieting feeling I felt earlier remained. I still feel that same sense of disquiet whenever I think about that freakishly tall man and his blank, uncanny stare. It's stories and encounters like that that haunt me when I'm backpacking through the mountains and, just like the friend I mentioned earlier, I never go alone anymore. Second story. This story was shared by you/man, so credits to him. Been having weird experiences around my house. Could this sound like a Wendigo? First off, this is what happened last night that really freaked me out. I have a back door in my room that leads outside to my backyard. The whole reason I was even wondering about Wendigos is because I live in Native American territory, Blackfoot to be exact. My house is also kind of located more rurally. I'm very close to the woods/mountain range. Anyways, last night around 1 a.m. I had opened my back door for some fresh air since it was a bit stuffy in my room. I stepped out for a sec to smoke a cig real quick, and then probably about 50 feet away I heard something that I can really only describe as sounding like an Aztec death whistle, followed by 2 thumps on the ground. Yeah, that freaked me out, so I ran back inside real quick, lol. My cat, who was laying on my bed, looked absolutely terrified as well. Her eyes were huge and she was just staring outside. I turned on the lights and went to look, and there was nothing there. Note, there's no houses behind mine, it's just the woods/mountains. Not the first time something like this has happened either. From when I moved here I've heard tapping a lot at my windows and doors, even once sounded like someone completely body slammed my back door in the middle of the night. In addition to that, I will occasionally hear whistling, but pretty faint whistling, at night. I always get kind of bad feelings over my backyard at night. I get oddly paranoid for seemingly no reason. Seems like this sort of thing is getting more common for me too. I'll hear this sort of thing a lot more often, and my little dog literally refuses to go outside at night to go to the bathroom. What does this sound like? I'm not really an expert, but I've learned more about Wendigos and it sounds a bit interesting. Third story. This story was shared by you/Born Beach, so credits to him. Something whispers my name in the woods. It used to happen now and again. I first remember hearing it when I was just a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I'd been on a stroll through the woods with my mom and her boyfriend, cutting through the park to get to an ice cream shop on the other side of town. "Freddie," the voice said, quietly like a whisper. At the time, I thought it was just my mom's boyfriend, now ex, playing a prank on me. "What?" I asked him. He shrugged. Didn't say anything. The second time it happened I was 10 years old. My school wasn't far from the forest, and occasionally we do our physical education classes out there. This particular time, we were playing capture the flag. I was the flag keeper and exhausted from running, so I found a small spot away from the action to catch my breath. The flag was stuck into my belt on my waist, so I couldn't just grab a breath anywhere. It was easy to steal if somebody was quick or quiet enough. It just so happened one kid, Ryan, thought he was that quiet. Honestly, I wouldn't have heard him either. He was nearly on top of me. "Freddie." I jumped at the sound of my name and Ryan lunged for my flag. Before he could reach me though, I bolted. At the time I thought that maybe Ryan called my name to rub in his impending victory. Like a, "Aha Freddie. Got you." sort of thing. As time wore on I learned that wasn't the case. The voice called out to me more frequently. When I was in high school, I got a job at a movie theater on the other end of town. The quickest route to get there was, you guessed it, to cut through the forest path. I walked it alone, and often. The more I did, the more the voice would whisper my name. Soon, it was whispering my name at least once every time I walked through the woods. "Freddy," it would say, and I'd stop and look around. When I wouldn't see anybody, I'd turn and continue on my way. This might sound a little silly, but I sort of got used to it. I guess maybe I just didn't want to think I was losing my mind, so I never told anybody about it. Being the kid that heard voices wasn't exactly a badge of honor in high school. Plus, I like to think that maybe I just had some kind of special connection with the woods. Like some spiritual hippie thing. I was 17 years old when the voice terrified me. I'd been leaving a late shift at the theater, one much later than I'd ever done before, and had an exam I still needed to study for the next morning. As much as I didn't want to cut through the woods after dark, I didn't have the money for a cab and the buses had stopped running. So I went through the forest. I'd walked the path 1,000 times before, why should tonight be any different? It was quiet at first. Only the wind and the swaying trees greeted my ears. Now and again I would hear something moving in the brush, but it was always easy enough to dismiss as a squirrel or raccoon. After all, I was in their territory. They were probably surprised by me. My heart jumped at the sound of my name. "Freddy," the voice said. "Jesus!" I snapped, not expecting it in the dark. I took a deep breath and told myself to relax. "It's just you," I mumbled to myself with a chuckle. I walked for a few more minutes when I picked up on the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Was somebody else taking the shortcut? I turned around, peering into the inky dark of the forest trail. While the moonlight was enough to make out the path directly ahead, it was tough to see much further than 10 or 15 feet. I pulled out my phone and turned on the light, casting it over the trail. Nothing. Just wood chips and a stray candy wrapper. I pocketed my phone, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and continued on. This time I picked up my pace, moving at a fast walk. "Freddy," the voice said again, this time less airy, and more forceful. I ignored it, continuing on my way. I just wanted to get the hell out of those woods. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you felt the same impulse now and again. The sensation that you aren't safe. I felt it in my gut. My body was telling me to leave as quickly as possible. The voice repeated my name, its tone shifting lower, then higher. It sounded unhinged, like an out-of-tune instrument. I'd never heard it repeat my name so often in such a short span of time. "Freddy," it sang. "Freddy. Freddy. Freddy." I broke into a run. "Freddy." It screamed, and footsteps thundered behind me. My mind went blank, my body acting on its own. I ran as hard and as fast I could. The voice screamed my name over and over again, its footsteps closing in on me. I shouted for help, my voice cracking. "Freddy!" It shrieked from right behind me. I pulled my phone out and frantically dialed 911. I wasn't sure any longer that I could outrun this thing, whatever it was. I needed help. Desperately. The phone beeped and I heard somebody answer on the other end. 911, what is your emergency? Something grabbed my shoulder. I screamed and whipped my hand around, connecting with nothing but air but managing to lose my phone in the process. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, throwing everything I had into my sprint. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but I knew the alternative of stopping would be far worse. I heaved breath after painful breath. Tears streamed down my face and my legs burned with exhaustion. I was going to die. I knew it. Then I burst out of the woods. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't stop to look behind me. I kept running until I reached the nearest neighborhood a couple blocks away. That night I took the long way home, sticking to the best lit streets and only those lined with homes. The voice, whatever it was, didn't follow me beyond the tree line. I'm home now, breathless and still trying to calm down. My mom's not here. She's still at her late shift at the hospital, but I'll tell her everything when she gets back. In the meantime I contacted the police and they're searching the forest. I don't know what it was that was whispering my name for all these years, but I know one thing, I'm never going back into those woods again. Shit. 1 second. I'm pretty sure I just heard the back door open. Alright, looks like I'll have to leave this here for now. I just heard my mom call my name from downstairs. She must be home early. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/deadgirl1367, so credits to him. Wendigo or Skinwalker, not sure. Immediate help please. My fiancé's farm has had a problem with whatever it is for years. However, it really hadn't been an issue as much as a presence. Like having a cougar on your land. You know it's there and could attack at any second. But it just doesn't. Our home is old, BTW. Very old, and 2 of the beams in the basement are made up of giant logs that may have come from the woods behind the field. So anyways. The first time its presence was seen, I was on the phone with my guy and he was sitting in his mom's car at night. We were teenagers then. That's when he noticed in this, admittedly really odd-looking, twisted tree that's outside a creature that was large and in his words, looked like a man becoming a beast. He carefully, calmly, got out of the car and hurried inside. It didn't seem to notice him. There's still claw marks on the tree. Not bear-like or cat-like. I looked up the area and back then, Google's so messed up now, I can no longer find it, that a Wendigo king has the hunting ground of the entire length of the creek that is down the road. It was this time of year and he said when he saw it, he heard laughter and war drums. Then I moved here years later. One night I saw what I thought was a red reflector by our mailbox. I was confused about who put that there, it had not been that morning. As I turned my headlights towards the box to better see, the red circle suddenly pulled back into the massive field across the street. As our friend and I got out of the car he said he saw something, that wasn't an animal, standing in the field. We hurried inside. This was autumn. The next autumn I was driving home alone and saw that same red reflector bobbing across the street. When I approached it suddenly whipped around like a startled animal and the light zoomed back into the field. I refused to leave the truck without someone coming for me. I should add I've seen that same light pacing the upstairs of the barn, through the window. Next time was during the 4th of July and we were having a small party. And had the barn door open. When dusk began I saw it. Giant, maybe as big as a horse. It looked like a man with no hair. Grayish purple, I suppose frostbitten colored, skin. Naked. Incredibly skinny as though it has no organs. A big grin on its face which seemed to be either because its lips were forcibly pulled back over its mouth or perhaps it had no lips or cheeks. Big hands and feet, and no antlers. Walking into the barn like a wolf. Reminded me of something out of Bloodborne. Its eyes were black at the moment. I told my guy and he did not believe me as I was begging him to help me close the barn. There is openings in the back it could leave from but the door being open did not feel right after that. Then his great-aunt asked, did anyone see that little girl go into the barn? It's well known by our family that a ghost of a small girl in white roams the farm and is well liked by us. He immediately agreed after that. Then nothing more. Occasionally I feel something reach out for me as I walk around at night, but I've read about W's when I was young and there's many spiritual things about me that seem to keep me safe. Regardless, I carry a buck knife when I travel at night just in case I have to defend myself. But then his mom left. His mom is very unhealthy and gluttonous in every form. Over 2 years without her and our farm was peaceful. We had been caring for his grandfather, who always said something dark followed him around. And in the last week of his life weird things kept happening. Then he died suddenly and nobody knows why. I had stated earlier that month that the more his mom was showing up again and the more we cleaned up and worked on the farm, the angrier something seemed to get. In fact, a few weeks before something grabbed onto my guy's father in the barn and make horrible screeches when he put up the mower after dark. There was also one night the barn got left open by him and as we were headed inside we heard the neighbors screaming. But my guy assured me that he hears them do that every few months. However, while the men sound like they're getting murdered, the woman always sounds fake. But I always hated their house because turkey vultures obsessively circle their plot, like a lot, sometimes 20. So then 2 nights ago, my guy had to help his mom, who's now situated herself into his grandma's home like the parasite she is, for almost 2 weeks. Things had been feeling peaceful and earlier that day I had been hoping that Grandpa captured the creature inside his body and it was going to be killed when he got cremated. Well, then they heard the lady neighbor screaming. Repeatedly. Inhumanly. From our pond. Before that they thought they heard a sound like a cat growl as well. Well, now his dumb mother is going around personifying it as she and saying she's a witch but that she's nice and spoke to her and she don't mean no harm. I've been a practicing white witch my whole life. That is an evil spirit. She's a fool. Furthermore, as she was blabbing that to my boyfriend's sister who was driving home at night, a deer suddenly exploded out of nowhere and destroyed her car. This sister was wanting to inherit the land around the pond. Mid-May we had also had a deer jump in front of us so fast it seemed impossible. Biggest deer I had ever seen and impossibly beautiful looking. Thankfully many people stayed with us while the cops got there. But ever since she had been visiting the last month worse and worse things have been happening. Which brings me to today. To me, myself. My guy was gone early today to help his uncle out. I was sleeping alone for the first time in months. I had a nightmare. It was that you sent me home from the food pantry because you had more stuff to do, but it was night. So I parked near next door because the food was for them and got out, and suddenly your mom came out from behind the house and was talking to me and I was just trying to get done quickly. But then I realized the whole time she was over I couldn't quite make out her face. So I started turning my flashlight onto her and your mom was like, "Oh, honey, now you don't want to do that." And when I did it was like seeing a refracted shadow. Like behind this vague silhouette was the appearance of your mom's hair and hands and feet, but the shadow was in front with this incomplete appearance of her in the back. And when I realized what it was my heart stopped and I started slowly backing up to their porch as this terrifyingly powerful man's voice said, "You don't want to do that." Before my head erupted with terrifying music and that voice laughing maniacally, enough to drive someone insane. But I kept continually calmly going to the porch as I began to forcibly pray and say, "In the name of God and Jesus, leave me alone and Christ compels you," and all that stuff. This is what I had texted him. It was horrifying. And I could sense it didn't want to devour me. It wanted to keep me. I said I was a practicing witch, but I also have been confirmed as a Catholic and I have a belief that's parts of every old religion and some of my own beliefs that I've formed from things I've been witness to. I awoke feeling like something was at my back. But my oldest cats were laying on me. Defensively. They're all still laying in bed with me and had not really in a long time. As I tried to get back to sleep, I prayed for my home and family to be kept safe. For positive energy to cover the land. And for evil spirits to be cast off of our land. Over and over and over until I finally fell back to sleep and had no more dreams. I have the most knowledge of mythical beings. I sing many songs while I work outside, including Cherokee songs. I work the land the old-fashioned way. I respect the land. Animals love me. And I've always felt that my soul is very, very old. Like it's been recycled for many lives. People always have called me a godsend as well because I'm at the right place at the right time to help. I don't quite know what it wanted of me, but it didn't work because I'd previously been visited in my dreams many times by a demon who insisted my soul belonged to him, only for me to deny him each time. This being when I was only a teenager. What I need is help to keep it off our land. At this rate my guy's mom is going to be killed by it. Or bring it closer to us all with her horrific miasma of an aura. I was already planning on planting sage and smudging the house as well. I've previously done so before. But if there's anything else we can do, I'd appreciate it. Any help at all. And I also know its hunting ground is indeed as vast as the creek is because a coworker who lives at the other end, we're near one ending point, caught it on video when he was walking at night and showed me. Its eyes looked like the red reflector I kept seeing. It seems to like to rest in our barn. But it's always been that we leave it be and it leaves us be. Please help. I downloaded the app so I can easily check back. Only serious answers please. I know there are skeptics to many things, I respect everyone's opinions and personal beliefs. But this is very serious. Also I should add that as far as I know there are no reservations around here at all. But that his great-grandfather was part Native Americans. Do not know what tribe. Thank you for any assistance. This has been over the course of roughly 10 years by the way. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/freespirited92, so credits to him. Wendigo in New Hampshire. Husband and I had a weird experience. We live in NH, on 5 acres of property. Moved here last year. My son and I always walk on the property, half cleared, half wooded trails. The past month our walks have felt different, just a weird sense I have felt. Cat has also been heightened in behavior, not that it is relevant. Since that feeling, I've started keeping closer to the house. Last week I went out in the afternoon, was hearing animal noises, odd for the time of day, I thought I saw a deer in the woods, but in the past month all animal sightings which used to be daily, deer, turkeys, fox, had subsided. So I thought, oh maybe deer are back. Told husband about it, and we just figured we'd keep an eye. Forward to yesterday, husband and I put our son down for the night, and while in the from room, we hear what sounds like coyotes, but high-pitched, more amplified sound than we had heard before. Not a usual noise. Didn't think much, until husband went to lock up for the night, he does a quick yell of my name, we both look out the slider door, and see a large figure out at the tree line, husband grabs gun and flashlight, as soon as that clicked on, it was gone. The only image we saw was probably 7 foot tall and lanky figure, upright, and all dark, as the moon was under clouds. We basically had our stomachs drop. I am now not going outside with our son, far at least, and have saged our house. Could it be Wendigo? Mother-in-law jumped to that, apparently she heard folklore growing up. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Kira Jasmine, so credits to him. The Wendigo Runner. It was 2 a.m., we were coming back from a long trip. We, being me and my friends, Jack, Gail, and Tim. Jack was driving while we were resting, but I could never get comfortable, so I ended up staying awake and talking to Jack most of the time. I remember we got pretty silent, so she turned on the radio and let me play some music. I tried to keep the music gentle since the others were sleeping. As we were driving down the highway, it was abnormally empty for being 2 a.m., we were near a factory that lets out last shift employees around that time, so we thought there would be a little more traffic. Guess not. I was just resting my eyes when I heard Jack step on the gas. I looked up and saw the form of a Wendigo run across the road, and I knew Jack had seen it as well. It didn't help us that we just got back from a paranormal adventure to some haunted places. Neither of us talked, but both of us saw its form, though very dark and blurry. It had long, lanky arms and legs. It looked a lot like a starved human that had somehow mutated into a monster of a sort, and since Wendigos are pretty common this time of year, there was no mistaking it. Brushing off what we had witnessed to calm ourselves down, not too further ahead there was a body in the road. I remember telling Jack to just run it over. I've seen this scenario play out in my head about 100 times and it always ended bad. The others woke up when we stopped and began panicking. We got Gail to get out and see what was going on. It wasn't too long before he motioned us to come out, but he didn't see what Jack and I had, so we were a little more cautious. When we got out, I heard some slight moaning coming from the corpse when it moved. As I got closer, I realized this corpse was actually just barely, alive human. I couldn't really tell the gender because in appearance, their body was gruesomely mangled. I could see parts of their intestines hanging out and their face was scratched and bruised. There were bite marks on their side and they were covered in the same blood that had pooled in the spot. Most of their clothes were torn but baggy enough that skin had barely shown. I thought they were dead at first, but when the body moved slightly and groaned, the first thing to come out of my mouth was, "Do you need help?" They did it. Is all I heard. I was beginning to realize the situation and panicked. I turned to the others. Tim had took a spot over on the side of the road and Gail was in shock. I knew Jack the most so I snapped him out of the blank face he gave and asked him what we should do. "I'm not sure, man. We should probably call 911. I glanced at my phone, no signal. I called over to the other two, they both said they had none either. What do you do in this situation? We had no idea where to go from there. I started looking at the wounds to see if I could help at all, but there was no chance of this person surviving. There was a lot of groaning when Jack and I had picked up the body and moved it as gently as we could to the back seat. Some more of the stomach had exposed itself, so we covered up the body in a blanket. Jack and I got in the back and sat there. Tim and Gail moved to the front and started heading to the nearest hospital. "What's your name?" Jack asked. The body had responded with, "Sam." In a very hoarse and low tone, I had wondered if their lungs were collapsing. They began to spit up blood. I grabbed a jacket and wiped the blood off their mouth with a sleeve. "You said, they did it. Who exactly did this to you?" I asked, not caring about the fact these could be their last words. "The Wendigos. They're hunting," was the only response I got. Jack and I looked at each other before we scanned the outside of the windows, looking to see if there were any more. It wasn't long before we heard screeching tires and felt our bodies thrown forward. None of us could recall what had happened, but the nurse told me it was unlucky of our friend, that they must have been attacked by wolves with the shape they were in. She wanted any of us to explain who the person was, but all we could give her was, their name was Sam. It took a lot of explaining to so many officers what had happened that night. We were even close to being charged with murder. but they had decided it was an animal attack. Apparently when the car crashed, their body had flung out through the windshield and rolled 10 feet from the car, killing them instantly. We thought this would be over and we could forget that night, but there was almost a perfect indent in the car that looked so human, yet not at the same time. The interior was coated in blood and a couple chunks of flesh. We never really saw it again except in the papers. Were the things we saw really Wendigos? I'm not sure, but whatever they were, they fit the description perfectly. Now that I think back, Sam had said they were hunting. Were they hunting us? There's still so many unanswered questions, but the whole deal still makes me sick to my stomach. I'm only telling this story to see if anyone has some insight about what really happened out there, or if there's any other attacks that have been reported. 7th story. This story was shared by you/PRZ1VAL77, so credits to him. Wendigo Hill. The following account is 100% truthful and took place at 3 a.m. on October 31, 2020. My friends and I always go on walks together past midnight. In the woods, along the roads, anything. We usually have 4 people, but this time Ben, the guy whose house we were staying at, could have 6 people over. So the 6 of us walked along the road to this Verizon tower on this hill. The stars look very nice up there at night, so we always do it. We get halfway up the hill and we're feeling uneasy. It's a full moon on Halloween after all. Nick, the oldest and most stoic out of us, the one who never jokes about or believes in the paranormal or anything, points his flashlight ahead on the trail. What the F is that? He rarely swears, so this was another attention-grabbing thing. We all stop and look ahead. About 20 paces ahead of us there it was. 8 feet tall, white as snow. A skin and bone, lanky, bipedal being within a stone's throw. 6 people all saw this at the same time. It takes off into the woods at superhuman speed. We stop and are silent for a moment. We immediately start asking if everyone saw it, and everyone did. We argue and cuss and I try my hardest to convince the others to turn back and forget it. But fearless Ben, who doesn't believe in anything, begs to push on. We do. Now I've cut down a lot of trees in my day. So I know what it sounds like when one falls. On the continuation of our voyage less than a minute later, a tree slams to the ground on the side of the trail. It didn't fall, it was pulled down with force. We stop and argue. We push on. A minute after that, we hear a rustle and a loud, painful chirp from a bird. We make it to the tower and look around us. The top of the hill is mostly devoid of trees, so we look down at the path where it ran. Ben is still trying to convince us he isn't afraid. We decide to run the half-mile back down to his house. We get there and Ben starts crying. He has never ever believed in anything his whole life. But he saw something up there. We all saw something up there. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. We've gone back up there but we haven't seen anything. I've done a lot of research into it. I have no doubt in my mind it was a Wendigo. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Cationator, so credits to him. The Weirs Beach Wendigo. Before June 28, 2019 I was an avid urban explorer. I would always look down back roads for abandoned houses and soon-to-be torn-down barns. I'm also a photographer by trade, so naturally I brought my camera along with me to capture the experience. So when my grandfather invited me up to his summer lake home in the White Mountains, I was gleeful. Not because of the mountain scenery, or the private lake with multiple jet skis, no. I was giddy at the thought of being able to explore one of my most sought-after abandoned destinations, Surf Coaster. Surf Coaster was a massive abandoned water park about 2 miles from Weirs Beach. The park covered about 10 square miles and was rumored to be the urban explorer's paradise. I arrived at the nearest public parking lot, a Cumberland Farms, at around 6:40 p.m. I used my GPS to see a topographical satellite view of the large abandoned parking lot of the water park. I was led down a few side streets and back roads until I saw the sign. Hidden among vines and bushes was a blue sign with yellow-tinted bulb lights surrounding it that said Surf Coaster. Next to it was a rusted and rather puny 2-foot-high gate with a faded, "No Trespassing" sign. I'll pretend I didn't see that. Stepping over the obstacle, I was presented with a parking lot with a few scattered 80s-looking hatchbacks and sedans. They were rusted with their windows smashed in, and graffiti plastered all over them. The parking lot stretched about 70 feet in front of me and then stopped to another fence. To my right there was a wooden fence, and to my left down a step hill was an urban explorer's dream. Water slides covered with ivy and moss, pools filled with deflated inflatable toys, and sunning chairs with towels still on them. As I started down the embankment, I stopped at what must have been the ticketing booth. Inside the ajar door was a small room consisting of a chair with a comb on it, an open cash drawer underneath the counter and a roll of tickets behind the chair. As I stepped inside, I noticed something in the open cash drawer. It was money. Water-damaged money. I gently picked up a 50 and held it up to the golden hour sunlight to see the blue security strip running down the bill. It was real. Why in the world would the company leave money at their closed park, I thought to myself. Placing the bill back in the drawer, I continued down the hill. The next 2 hours were fairly standard for urban exploring: chipping paint, dirty water, rotting wood, all except for one small detail. The towels. On most the lounge chairs by the large pool were people's towels. As if they had just left them. I thought nothing of it and ignored it. After I had seen the last enormous moss-covered water slide, I only had one more place to go. The bathrooms. Now at this point in my adventure, the sun had already set, and a cool breeze was making the hairs on my arms stand up. As I traversed the crumbling pool deck to the hillside bathrooms, I noticed something odd: the bathroom doors. The doors were rusted steel with large locks on them. When I got there, I was right. Large rusted locks were holding the bathroom doors shut. But why the bathrooms? I wanted to explore them, but they were built into the hillside and were mostly underground, so there was only one entrance. As I looked around for a rock or some heavy object to try and dislodge the locks, I realized that the ground surrounding the bathrooms were scattered with bullet shells. They were still shiny, and using my scarce weapon knowledge they looked to be .30 caliber rounds. My stomach turned as the park could actually be closed due to an active shooter or terrorist. Wouldn't that have been on the news? I mean, that's a big deal. I settled myself as they could have just as easily been rounds fired by some rednecks who used the water park as their gun range. It was New Hampshire after all. I soon found a rusted fire extinguisher and successfully knocked the men's room lock off. Inside was an assortment of more towels, swim goggles, duffel bags, and dried-up sunscreen bottles. The whole room smelled like vinyl for some reason, and I could barely snap a few pics before bolting out of there. Odd that they would lock that up, but it could serve as a home for homeless people or drug dealers. I was just going to skip the women's room assuming it would be more of the same. But then the thought hit me, what if it was something else? What if it was the same? I had to know. After retrieving the fire extinguisher from the bush I threw it into, I knocked off the second lock, and opened the heavy door. A blast of air hit me. There were two things wrong with that air. One was the fact that it made me as cold as I had ever been, and that it smelled like a rotting animal. I stepped out of the way to let myself warm up for a few seconds. I saw a good photo opportunity there with both doors open, so I took it. Setting my shutter speed to capture the light just right, I was about to take the photo when through the viewfinder I saw something that made my blood curdle, movement from inside. There was a grayish-brownish movement coming from inside. I dropped my camera and froze in fear. The faint lighting the full moon gave was enough to reveal the creature that slowly emerged in front of me. It was crouched down to fit inside the doorway, so I could only guess it was 9 feet tall. Its face was that of a wolf and it had teeth that jutted out of its lips. Its fur was greasy and slimy, like that of a dog's saliva, and as started at it let out the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. Its wail was high-pitched and raspy at the same time. Adrenaline rushed through me as I turned to run back up the cracking stairs to the hill. My feet pounded on the moist soil as I neared the parking lot. I glanced over my shoulder and only then could I see the complete mass of the creature. It had to be at least 10 feet tall and its strides on all fours told me I had to run faster than I had ever run before if I wanted to live. So I did. I ran all the way back to the main road and all the way to the gas station, all while listening to its ear-piercing wails grow farther away. I practically dived in my car and nearly stalled it trying to peel out. I drove the 2-hour journey back to Lincoln with my foot to the floor most of the ways. Even though I'm back in civilization I still don't feel safe, and I regret going there. I also regret dropping my camera. So if anyone wants a Canon 1DX, check the abandoned bathrooms at Surf Coaster, but beware of the Weirs Beach Wendigo. 9th story. This story was shared by you/The Silent Observer, so credits to him. There's an alien in the woods. Every dog owner fears the day their dog runs off. For me, living in a small rural town, it was a break-in. Some idiot high on narcotics and desperate for more drug money to feed his high. He smashed our living room window and blundered right into my dog Roscoe. Roscoe is a fully grown German Shepherd and doesn't take kindly to intruders. By the time me and my wife had gotten downstairs the man had stolen a purse and made off with more than a few injuries. The biggest problem? Roscoe was still chasing him. I took my double-barrel shotgun and told my wife to stay and call the police. Then I took off after the two. The three of us ran clear across my entire farm and into the adjacent forest. One of the benefits of living in the middle of nowhere is that the nights are a lot clearer. Many a night have I spent gazing at the stars and committing to walks in the bright moonlight. Tonight was not one of those nights. One of the downsides of living in the middle of nowhere is that when a new moon strikes with clouds in the sky, you can't see anything. In my haste I had neglected to bring a flashlight. I had to rely on the sound of barking, running, and snapping twigs to get by. It wasn't enough. Pretty soon I had stumbled my way into being lost with only a vague direction to continue my pursuit. It was then I started to hear something else. A repeating click echoing through the trees. All the animals that made that kind of noise were asleep, and it was far too deep and powerful to be a bat. The sound was concerning, but nothing compared to what I heard next. Roscoe's barking started coming from two directions. It was unmistakably his voice, both of them, but one was moving fast. Even with the trees in the way I could tell this thing was moving at least as fast as a fully grown elk running through an open field. Roscoe started to respond, and after a quick back and forth the panicked intruder started to catch on. I can't even imagine what his coked-out brain was thinking at the time. 2 dogs. After a botched robbery. It was no surprise when he began to shout profanities, but those profanities were cut off almost immediately. There was no scream, just a crack and silence. My dog had a very different reaction. His aggressive barks had turned fearful, but Roscoe too went quiet after a yelp and a thud. As for me, I was angry. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I did know that something hit my dog. It didn't matter if it was a bear out for a late-night snack or a Wendigo. I was gonna pump that sucker full of lead and get Roscoe out. I burst onto the scene screaming obscenities and threats that would have made my local church bar me from entry. No bodies. No sign of life. Nothing but a giant splatter of blood covering an entire tree trunk. I continued. In hindsight, I must have looked like a chicken with its head cut off with how furiously and randomly I was bounding around, but I was on a mission and there wasn't anything that'd stop me. Or so I thought. The thing must have been at least 12 feet tall. 6 massive clawed limbs, 2 legs and 4 arms. An exoskeleton as white as snow and a singular massive eye as black as night. Organs of unknown purpose were embedded into the horn-like growths on the side of its head, a mesh of flesh that made me want to vomit. Trypophobia, I think the term is. Right below it all was a big maw of needle-like teeth. Yeah, I froze. So did it. And then I decided that blowing the demon spawn's head off was the right play. Nothing on this earth moves so fast. My trigger finger had barely twitched before the thing had jumped up into the trees. I discharged at a leaves, then tried to pin the thing down. I think the most frightening part about this encounter was the lack of sound. I have absolutely no idea how something that big could whirl between trees and barely even bend them. It was like I was trying to shoot a ghost, and pretty soon the remaining shot I had acted like I'd hit one too. I swear I'd unloaded my buckshot straight into its chest. The thing had landed behind me and I had turned around. Darn thing didn't even flinch. I knew then that all this was theatrics. A statement. I couldn't do anything to it, and it could do everything to me. There's nothing like being that powerless, but I didn't get to feel fear for very long. I turned to run and everything went black. When I came to it was to the smell of wet dog. Roscoe was cuddled up right next to me looking like he'd taken a dip in a lake. I threw my arms around him, he licked my face, and then we took a look around the cave we'd found ourselves in. The first thing I took note of was the thief, or at least what remained of him. Blood covered the stone slab he'd been placed on. His right leg and arm along with a good portion of his torso had been ripped clean off. The severed limbs had been placed back in their correct orientations as if there had been an attempt to piece him back together, but the man was clearly dead. I can only hope it was instant. Probably was. The second thing, of course, was the alien. I can't for the life of me figure out why, but it was hanging above me, its body spread out over the entire cave ceiling. With the daylight now pouring in I could see it was facing down, watching me without a hint of motion on its end. We just laid there, myself on the ground and it on the ceiling, staring at each other for what had to be at least 10 minutes. I got a good look at the thing in that time. One of the most striking features of the creature was its shell carvings. I couldn't see them in the panicked state I had been in, but now the alien symbols and pictographs were laid bare. There were 2 that stuck out to me. One of an alien in ceremonial robes anointing another of its kind in a backdrop of blazing fire. The other? A human riding a dog the size of a horse and toting a lever-action shotgun. No. I have no idea. After an eternity of wondering if the thing was conducting some alien mating ritual, it finally moved from its statue-like state. Its mouth said something, a long sentence. I could only pick out a few words. The bargain. Death. Heresy. The kind of words that can shake a man to his very soul. Far from reassuring. What confused me more, however, is that there were clearly other human languages dotted throughout. I could tell the alien spoke with a confident fluency, but what he was saying was a patchwork of foreign and understandable words. Variable word spam, if you will. I just asked what the actual hell it was in return. After a bit of back and forth, the alien caught on to what I was saying, and in a perfect mimicry of my own voice mused about me only using one aspect of human common. It then apologized for the thief's death, stating that it was used to humans being more sturdy. I had no idea what to say, but it didn't seem to want me to say anything. It slowly climbed down from its perch, never breaking eye contact as it did so. The alien cleared up who the intruder had been, clearly making sure he hadn't been a friend of mine, before asking me a favor. Keep people from snooping around. Apparently it had deduced I was just some random Joe and didn't see a point in being hostile. It would let me go as long as I promised to dissuade people from poking about in its territory while it acclimated to old Earth. Yeah. Old Earth. Seeing no other option, and wholly incentivized to not let anyone near this thing, I agreed. The alien then reached across the cave with its long arms and picked up my wife's purse from behind the stone slab. I noticed it was speckled with blood and dirt as it was dropped into my lap. Roscoe smelled it, seemingly not even bothered by the giant in front of us. The specter said that it had been told long ago that warm water and dish soap would do the trick, then sent me on my way. When I got back, I learned pretty fast that a good 9 hours had passed since I'd run off into the forest. I told police that I'd shot the guy, but he'd gotten away, dropping the bag in the scuffle. Then we both had encountered a late-night bear. Yeah, it raised some eyebrows, but it worked for the time being. My wife knew better, of course. That woman always could tell when I was spouting malarkey. I just don't know how to tell her there's an alien living in the woods. I'd sound nuts. It's really put a healthy dose of concern in her mind, and now I can't get away from the questions. Roscoe is just going on like nothing happened. You'd think with someone breaking into our home he'd be a bit more alert, but no. He's completely aloof to an unnatural degree. And the bag. Oh, the bag. I washed the thing. Wanted to do it personally, partly as an apology to the missus. It had a note inside. Call me heresy. It was scrawled in perfect cursive. Now when I look out into that forest I can't help but feel like heresy is staring back at me. I've got every question in the world and no answers. If I try and tell the government, I'll be labeled as crazy. If they believe me, they get ripped to shreds before I meet the same fate. If I don't do my newly found job, I go missing. If I post about it to the internet. Well, I don't know. I guess I'm looking for advice from strangers who don't even know me. All the locals. I care if they think I'm crazy. You guys? Not so much. So tell me. What the actual hell am I supposed to do here? 10th story. This was shared by you/necessary, and 775 so credits to him. The time I saw a Wendigo outside my house, true story. This happened a year ago. I still haven't told many people about it because it still shakes me to my core. I was home with my dad. We live on the outside of town near miles of deep dark forests. It was around 11 p.m. My dad had went to bed, but I sat out in the living room and watching a movie and pigging out on some food. I got up and walked down to the restroom. While walking down the hallway I noticed that outside was really quiet. There were no coyotes howling and our cows weren't mooing either. It was strange, but quickly just forgot I did my business in the restroom, and while I was washing my hands I looked out the window to my right. It is about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. I saw what I thought was a face. It looked pale and like it had half of its face just gone or rotting. Of course I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then the motion sensor light turned on and I saw it in all of its ugly and scary glory. I looked at it while it looked at me. I stood there staring at it. I stood like that for so long it could have been minutes or an hour. Just as I thought it couldn't get worse, the thing moved and took off running into the woods. I stood there for a while longer before I moved again. I ran, told my dad. He didn't think much of it, but he got up and went outside to check, and I went and grabbed a shotgun. Luckily the thing was gone. I haven't seen it since, but one thing is for sure, I will never stay home alone or stay up late ever again. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.